Hey guys, Bowserkins here for another video. Today we're going to be talking about an article that was posted on Wowhead about 13 hours ago. And it was in relation to, or more or less emphasizes a post that was made 12 days ago. And in here, it details a number of proposed changes to the Mythic Plus dungeons. And it's premised around the idea that, Necrotic Wake is the easiest and most fun dungeon to do, and that we should all the dungeons should feel like they're as easy as Necrotic Wake. For people who watch this channel or certainly know me personally, played the game with me before, I'm usually at face value against anything like this. I feel like if you have a dungeon that is easier than all the other dungeons, then the answer is to make that dungeon more difficult and not to make all the other dungeons easier. Um, and that's because it's much easier to just make one dungeon more difficult than it is to make all the other dungeons, in this case 7, more difficult, but also because um, I feel like I play Mythic. I mean, for me, I play Mythic Plus for how difficult it is in the higher key range. I'm not like a plus 15 Andy trying to do just my weekly keys. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I play it for the challenge, right? So I don't like when a dungeon feels too easy, which is certainly the case for Necrotic Wake, and why it's one of my least favorite dungeons this expansion. Unless I'm trying to do weekly 15s. If it's a bad affix week and our push team decides we're not going to push that week all that much, then getting a Necrotic Wake key feels great. So let's go ahead and sum up the TLDR here. There are detailed explanations down below. I'm not going to go into this because, I want to say this for you guys. If you want to look in here and figure out the detailed explanation, that's fine. But also, out of respect for your time, I don't want to turn this into a 1-hour video. So we're just going to go over the bullet points here, discussing some of them in length and discussing them maybe just for a few seconds, depending on how bad or how good I find the idea to be. I will say, though, I do not like Tyrannical and Fortified. Just, right off the bat, I'm going to tell you guys that before we get into the actual TRD here, the TLDR. I do not like Tyrannical and Fortified. So you're going to hear me reference that a lot in this video, and that's because that's a pain point for me personally. I feel like whenever Blizzard has a really good idea for a boss fight or a trash pack, like introducing this really cool mechanic that could potentially be lethal if not handled correctly, it's magnified into a worse version of where it could be, whether it be a trash pack or a boss, because of the dynamic around tyrannical and fortified. That's why I think it's a bad idea. I think they just need to get rid of tyrannical and fortified, to smooth out the experiences in Mythic Plus and just focus on the rotating affixes, things like necrotic and bolstering and explosive and volcanic and all that stuff. All right, so let's start out with Sanguine Depths here. Move the first Venthyr Anima Cage from the current location to G6, the first pack in the long corridor where the first boss is. That would be right past where the broken wall is. I'm not going to pull up the MDT here. I think you guys, if you've listened this far into this video, you know where this is and what he's talking about. This was more or less just to set up the 50% damage buff or however many stacks you can get onto the first boss. I think that this issue is far better solved with just getting rid of Tyrannical. But if you're not going to get rid of Tyrannical, I think this is a pretty good idea. Just so that the pain point of the first boss is dealt with. Although I will say, if you get 50% damage buff on a fortified week, you're going to absolutely massacre that first boss. And I don't think that's healthy, right? That's probably not a good experience. Also, Crixus the Voracious Hungering Drain. His one spell you can interrupt no longer applies a tick of damage if interrupted within 1 second of cast. I disagree with this because everybody kicks it within 1 second of the cast. I think you're probably just better off getting rid of Hungering Drain altogether because it feels like an odd mechanic to have in there anyway. There are already enough mechanics in the fight, so if anything, just get rid of Hungering Drain. But everybody kicks this within 1 second anyway. So it would basically just eliminate the mechanic entirely anyway. So just get rid of it. All right, Crixus the Voracious. His Severing Smash no longer applies an orb to the tank. I think this would be overkill. You're talking about essentially removing 20% of the damage from Severing Smash. I think that's overkill, especially again if we're talking about a world where Tyrannical doesn't exist. Um, then removing 20% of the damage would be way overkill. Of course, it would be overkill on a fortified week. Um, I think this is the only challenging aspect of the fight period. So nerfing it by 20% would turn this boss into more of a chore than anything else. That you don't feel like you're going to ever fail. It just takes a certain amount of time off the timer. I like the smash being the difficult part of the fight. Just get rid of Tyrannical so the fight's not lasting 5 minutes and your healer goes because that's what wipes you more often than anything else. In like a plus 23, plus 24, is that your healer is either A, out of mana or out of cooldowns because the fight lasted so dang long. All right, and the last one here, Grand Proctor Beryllia's Fragments of Radiance, the yellow orbs that reduce the red explosion's damage now also reduce damage from Endless Torment. The AOE damage after the explosion. So what they're talking about is like the ticking AOE damage after the explosion when the swirlies start to appear under your feet. Um, I don't know if I'm okay with this because the amount of the reduction would make that kind of trivial. I do agree though that if you're not going to get rid of Tyrannical, you're probably going to want to nerf the damage a little bit that this ability actually does. I don't think that you need the yellow orbs to reduce the damage of the Endless Torment afterwards, but you do need to probably do something about the damage here because when you get into the really high Tyrannical keys, this boss is a pretty big wall for some, and that's mainly because you don't have an urn for it. You've got like if you do everything really well, you've got an urn for the second boss in the hallway, but you don't have one for Beryllia. So I'm not against this, but yeah, finding a way to make Beryllia easier is good unless you take Tyrannical out, in which case that boss is fine. All right, we're gonna move on to Theater of Pain here. Nothing really else to add to the Sanguine Depths thing. Theater of Pain is one of those. I think it's a prime example of the issue with Tyrannical and Fortified, in that on Tyrannical week the bosses take forever, and then when you're talking about Fortified weeks, the lieutenants in the Zav wing literally take forever, and that's not the only ones, right? There are numerous ads in all the wings that have a lot of health. So Fortified feels bad in there as well. And of course, there are a lot of damaging abilities on Fortified weeks that will just absolutely massacre your team, whether it be Bone Spears in Kolthrock Wing, or the Withering Discharge in the Carnage Wing, or um, just lieutenants in general, or that stupid 5-pack between the two lieutenants right before you get to Zav. That pack is heinous on Fortified weeks. So again, the issue in my opinion in Theater of Pain is the fact that Tyrannical and Fortified exist, and not because the dungeon needs anything changed necessarily. um, but basically, the idea here for me to summarize, guys, because I proofread this before I started recording, he wants to introduce buffs depending on the wings. For example, here, if you kill Zav, you get extra physical damage done, extra magic damage done, and extra health. And these bonuses, depending on the wing, are not exactly the same. You'll get more magic damage if you kill Kolthrock first rather than Zav. And you'll get more health from Gorechop if you kill him first, or basically in summary, all of them combined provide you with 20% extra damage depending on your spec, and then an extra 20% health. This is moving the goalposts, in my opinion. I'm not a fan of this kind of thing at all. I think you just get rid of Tyrannical and Fortified. I mean, that I think that solves the problem for Theater of Pain more than anything. Giving artificial buffs would trivialize the last boss even more, because you'd have like this massive buff, and some people already save Banner in some situations for it. So I'm not a huge fan. Not a huge fan of this kind of thing. Just get rid of Tyrannical and Fortified. I think it's going to be a much better time for you. And also, this would introduce a situation where you're in a pug and, all of a sudden your mage is being toxic because you're not willing to go Kolthrock Wing first. And instead you go Dav, providing 10% extra physical damage instead of 10% extra magical damage for the first boss killed. Not a, not something I feel like some people would be reasonable about. All right, so the other side here, Haunted Urns, Night Fae. These are the Night Fae urns, the ones you click on to stun the mobs. Now also damage enemy mobs for 20% of their maximum health on activation. In addition to the stun, this would be way overkill. If it was like 5, maybe 10%, but I mean 20%, a fifth of their health. I can't imagine the meta would not become pulling like 3 packs on top of these urns and trying to find a way to survive it, just because of the sheer amount of maximum health that this would nuke them by may actually be worth it. I'm not necessarily sure, but I think this would make them too powerful. I'd be down for 5 or 10%. It would be kind of cool to see, a portion of their health erased, but you have to understand that if you're going to eliminate, even if it's not possible to cheese this, like if they introduce like some kind of weird target cap, like you can only hit a maximum of 10 targets with this urn, 20% makes those trash packs so much easier, and it tears off minutes from the key, right? So, I'm very hesitant, very, very hesitant to say that this is something that I would support at the number that's being proposed. All right, if you activate a Haunted Urn during Phase 2 of the Mazzala encounter, it will remove 50% health from all 4 Shattered Visages, allowing you to 1 phase on plus 23 keys. Note there are only there are only 2 urns that apply to this, the one near the Hakar Wing and the one near the Ardenwild Wing. So this is, I think removing Tyrannical would fix this issue much better. I think this would be a really clunky solution to it, and it would force you to make a decision of skipping an urn on a trash pack so that you could save it for the last boss. I think the answer is either don't make the ad scale with Tyrannical, or just remove Tyrannical, period, because on Fortified Weeks, and plus 23, since that's the example given, on a Fortified Week, those ads die. You 1 phase it on a Fortified Week. It's just the Tyrannical weeks where if you don't have a burst character, if you're playing a what's a good example, like maybe an Ellie Shaman, I think, someone without burst. Someone help me out here in the comments, guys. Like, what specs do you play where you're doing high keys and you find it difficult to solo the ad? Write that down in the comments. Yeah, I don't think this is the solution, guys. I think it's just make it to where the ads don't scale with Tyrannical. All right, new Haunted Urn in the Mechagon area and the room where the robot dog exists, 4RF, meant to be ARF. So yeah, I'm okay with this. It would make the room a little bit more easy, but I also think that room should be easier. But if they introduce the 20% max health on activation thing as well, you're just going to steamroll this pack. So, I mean, I guess you guys make the decision on that one. Write down in the comments what you think of that. I'm not opposed, nor do I support this idea. Hakar's ads, the Son of Hakar, have 50% reduced health and are now tauntable. Oh my god. Okay, so guys, look. When you nerf something by 50%, it's got to be really bad. It's got to be insanely bad to nerf something by 50%. That is just so overkill. These, if you remove Tyrannical, this boss would not nearly, would not be a meme as much as it is now. But nerfing the boss health or nerfing the Sons of Hakar health by 50% is just yikes. And then you give them an aggro table too, so that so that the tank can get aggro on them and stuff, like make them tauntable. Um, I mean, this boss fight, if these changes, like if we just took this at face value and implemented it tomorrow, this boss would be an instant clapper, even on tyrannical weeks, because you would never have a big shield. Your group is taking far less damage because the ads have an aggro table. The tank would just group them all up. You'd AoE burst them down. They have no health now, right? So it would be a complete and utter joke after this change. So this would be way overkill. I do like the idea of them either being tauntable or having a little less health, like maybe 10%. But I also don't feel like Hakar is difficult on Fortified Week at all. It's just when you're dealing with him on Tyrannical, people run out of cooldowns, you know, and it's a race against the clock, essentially. When you get into those higher keys, this can be a pain point, and that's totally fair. I think he mentions in the detailed explanation, Hakar can go to hell. This is a common sentiment for people doing higher keys. I have to imagine, since this person is mentioning 23s, 24s, or whatever, that they do high keys. So if that is the case, I can understand why he wants Hakar to be easier. But I think this is absolutely overkill, especially for the majority of the player base. This boss fight would be turned into a complete joke. All right, so Miss of Tyranid Scythe here. Replace the Drust, Bowbreaker, the big boys that hit the ground for AoE in Group 8 with 2 Drust Spike Claws. I'm trying to think of what pack he means here. I don't know exactly what I could probably pull it up in MDT and figure out which group. Here's my thing about Miss. I don't find that there's any problem whatsoever with the trash in Miss. My gripes with Miss entirely revolve around the dungeon's second boss, which he mentions here, Miss Collar, and the fact that on Tyrannical Week you can't one phase the first boss easily, even if you like completely devote yourself to that goal. So it's really annoying to two phase the first boss on a Tyrannical Week. Sometimes if it's a really high key, you have to three phase it if you haven't pugged the right classes. So my answer is, like, again, get rid of Tyrannical or nerf the boss HP on the first boss, and as his idea further down here is reduce the number of phases on Miss Collar. The trash is fine. So, and he mentions there is another good idea here: reduce the dress spike claws. Or no, that's not the one. It's the dying breath here. Dress spike claws dying breath. The 10% increased damage done debuff thing no longer applies to players, only to NPCs, including bosses. So what he's saying here basically is that the dying breath ability, it's a magical effect on the spike claws. Instead of it applying to the players, he's saying it should apply to enemies, including bosses. I disagree with this. I think that it would very much become like in Plaguefall, where you're trying to plague bore the bosses. The new meta would be that you have to, because that is so much damage, you must move the spike claws over to the bosses, and that's the kind of cheese strats that I like to see less in Mythic Plus. There are some cool ones, and then there are some really bad ones. I think that this kind of cheese strat would be really bad. It's right up there with, snapping crafters up to cleaver the bosses and stuff in Necrotic Wake, right? An example of the type of thing I don't like doing, because it takes away the sense of accomplishment for yourself and transfers it over to this exogenous form of damage that isn't really meant to be there. I don't like that feeling as a player in Mythic Plus. You may disagree. Let me know in the comments. I'm sure you're going to be absolutely reasonable about that. But I love this idea. No longer a guessing game at 10% for Miss Collar. That is like the best idea ever. I think that a lot of people have this sentiment. When I'm pugging keys, especially when we have voice with people I don't know, especially, it's a common opinion in my push group this last guessing game at 10% is just the worst thing ever, and always just upsets us when we don't beat the check on it, i.e., bursting the last 10% before the cast gets off. Always a bad feeling, and it should just not be there because this boss fight takes freaking forever. All right. Whenever a night fate claims a seat, those respawn points, the respawn points that you click the seat for, and you can now respawn there. Applies the mushroom buff to all players, 10% increased primary stat. I disagree with this completely. I do not think this is necessary whatsoever. I think that if you were to nerf the first boss health pool, maybe even get rid of the Drust Spike Claw's Dying Breath entirely, like just make it to where it doesn't exist anymore, because the bleed itself is already bad enough. Yeah, they're talking about reducing the Spike Claw's bleed damage here. I disagree with that. Just have the Spike Claw damage in itself be the mechanic of those little guys. I mean, you're dealing with trivial mechanics at a much less lethal level in dungeons like Halls of Atonement, right? So getting rid of the Dying Breath is fine. Because right now the Dying Breath thing is like, hey, do we have a Dispel for magic effects? Oh, we don't? Okay, we have to fight the Spike Claws by ourselves. Or like by themselves, right? Because then you end up in a situation where you kill the Spike Claws first and then you get nuked by everything else. That's not a good it's not a good time. So getting rid of Dying Breath would be fine. That's probably the only change to trash that I would see, and then or that I would agree with. And then the miscolor thing is right on the money. Maybe when you claim the seeds, it gives you the health buff instead, and then the health mushrooms in the first area, which nobody uses ever, are just removed, right? Or maybe they just, right next to the seed, they add those health mushrooms so you can click on those. I mean, having extra health in the dungeon wouldn't be a bad thing, and it would be a nice compromise to this idea. But just, I mean, this would more or less give people permanent 10% increased primary stat, which I don't think is necessary in Miss. All right, so Mythic Plus, Spine Mod Gorgers, Polda and Tredova no longer turn the Mist of Tyrannicide dungeon achievement mob turn into it, where they heal a full. This is just so that you can pull mobs into the last boss. Okay, so I haven't really had a problem with this because I play Guardian Druid and I can just in-cap roar when they start channeling their heal, or we can throw out a leg sweep or a cap totem. We have lots of ways to deal with this. Let me know in the comments. Is this a pain point for people? I mean, it's hard to build a 5-man team that doesn't have an AoE stun. I mean, if you are doing something like this, if you're pulling Spine Mod Gorgers into Tredova, you know, like you're probably doing decent level of keys if you're doing a strategy like this, right? So let me know in the comment section if this is actually an issue for you. I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to it. Because I mean, even if they're not channeling the heal, it's still really difficult to work around the Gorgers plus the boss because of just the sheer amount of area of denial that's happening. All right, Spires of Ascension. We got Force-Horn Skirmishers no longer jump away. Let me grab a drink here. Okay. I think the issue with the Forlorn Skirmishers is definitely more about the hurl than anything else. When they're hurling spears at your group, the damage can get completely out of control. I think this is an issue more to do with Fortified, though. On Tyrannical Weeks, it doesn't feel like it's nearly as much of an obstacle in higher keys. The way you deal with the jump away is obviously LOS them back. If they don't jump away, it's going to mean more damage to the tank. I know this is annoying, guys, but you know we can't just wave a magic wand at all the difficult aspects of a dungeon and expect it to still be challenging and fun. So I don't know how I feel about this change. Let me know in the comments, guys. Do you think skirmishers should no longer jump away? Increase. Oh god, I always screw this guy's name up. Orophyrion's drained. Eh. Did I nail it? Bonus damage phase where you recharge his energy bar from 100% additional damage. Okay, so basically what they're saying, or what this person's saying, is Oro's burst phase should be in line with Ingram Alex. I think this issue is better solved with just again removing Tyrannical, but if you're looking at reducing the amount of time on the boss, that's fine with me. Because on Tyrannical weeks, this boss lasts forever. Just keeping in mind though that if this is a fortified week, you probably burst this guy to straight dead if it's 200%. So you go through that first phase, which is really, I mean, on fortified weeks, this boss would be left to be basically a one phase clapper if the bonus was doubled. All right, provide one additional Spear of Destiny, which is the Kyrian Stun Spear, inspires on the seat of the Archon platform where Devos is. Okay, so where would you use the second spear for value before you get upstairs? You would probably use it on the Warden's pack, the double Warden, double Justicar pack, along with some Hurlers. You would LOS that pack over, and then you would spear it. And then you would still have a spear for upstairs. I'm okay with this. This would actually introduce a pretty cool strategy. And the stun spears are powerful, but Spires of Ascension is one of the more difficult dungeons in the game. So I like this idea. This is great. I'm down for that. All right, last idea here: increase damage dealt by Archon Spear during the Devos fight by 50%. Okay, so basically they're saying make the fight last less time than it currently does. Anyone who's done Devos on Tyrannical in a high key understands why this is being said. I agree with this. I mean, it's fine as long as you have the same number of phases. If this would eliminate one of the phases, I don't know about that. But this fight literally it's like a 5.5 minute fight on Tyrannical. That's in a high key anyway. That's way too freaking long. You know what I mean? But I think the issue around Devos has more to do with Tyrannical. All right, because on Fortified, she's fine. Halls of Atonement. Increase High Adjudicator Elise's Volley of Power, the interruptible AoE cast, damage by 200%. This is to make the fight slightly harder, since it's kind of a joke even on plus 24. I don't think this would, turn hard, or I don't think you can look at this and be like, oh, easy boss into okay boss. I don't think that's what this would do. Maybe you could increase the damage by 100%. 200% I think is way too high. Especially if you're going to keep Tyrannical around, you might actually end up with like group-wide one-shots if you don't interrupt it. But if you increase the damage by maybe 100% or 50%, and then you also increase the single target spell cast that he does, I think it's called the Bolt of Power, to where it's like a tank buster, where it chunks the tank for like 40% of his HP every time it goes off or something. Or maybe even more. If I remember correctly, the Bolt of Power it's not cast very often. So maybe have that do like 70% of the bosses or 70% of the tank's health and damage unmitigated, right? Something that like really chunks you. It's not like a one-shot thing, because then that would be too many interrupts within the fight, I think. But especially if you're like a cloth-based team, if you have like double mage or warlock mage or something like that, where your kicks are on a longer cooldown, that might present some long-term issues if you have both of those casts being deadly. But I agree, this boss absolutely must be more difficult, and I think the areas to improve it would be to increase the amount of damage that his interruptible casts do. All right, add 2 extra loyal Stoneborns on Lord Chamberlain, the last boss. This boss is actually really easy. It's made difficult by the fact that Halls of Atonement, for the most part, you skip lieutenants in here, whether it be one or two lieutenants. Sometimes I've seen a couple. I've seen some groups. I mean, the MDI, for example, they were skipping 3 lieutenants, which is a bit excessive. But I don't think the answer here is to add more loyal Stoneborns. I think the answer is like be done with the season so that you're not adding a slow plus lethal statues coming across the field every 15 seconds. Because on fortified weeks, this boss does not take a super long time to kill. I'm okay with one extra. I mean, if you guys want to like bring a loyal Stoneborn into this fight, that's fine. But I think 2 would be excessive because that is a lot of damage. All right, to Plague Fall here, bring back the 2 rigged Plague Borers after the first boss room. Such a nice strat for killing the first boss. I need another drink, guys. Look, I mean, again, no disrespect to the writer of this article. This is not meant to be like just a dunk on anyone who has ideas like this. It's great that people are providing feedback, and of course, they're always going to open themselves up to scrutiny and criticism. But you know, some of these ideas are good and some of these are bad. This cannot happen. Please, for the love of God. I mean, the Plague Borer meta was awful. It was really cool to see in the Great Push. Remember the first Great Push and, the meme around Plague Borers and Echo now where they were snapping the Plague Borers all the way over to the 3rd boss and down into the 4th boss. It was completely ridiculous to see that happen, right? It was so ridiculous, but it was also like really cool to see really good players doing something like that. This is... Please don't. Now, he's not talking about bringing back the endless Plague Borers Gauntlet. So, I want to be fair to what this is actually proposing. But any iteration of Plague Borers on bosses was toxic, and I do not want to see it ever again. It was trivializing the encounter massively. And, we already have the red slime strategy for the first boss. He's already kind of a joke because of it. So having the red slime plus 2 rigged Plague Borers to bring up to him, I mean, you're talking about like a 25-second fortified fight at that point, right? You're just obliterating a plus 25 Glob Grog on fortified weeks with this type of a strategy. It's not. Please don't. I don't think that I need to go any further on this. The red slime is fine, guys. Jesus, like please, like leave some challenge in the dungeons. I don't want to sound like a boomer or anything, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just salty. Maybe there's just leftover salt from season 1 where right off the bat I had people breathing down my neck that I wasn't utilizing the Plague Borers correctly, and I felt like it was a dungeon entirely revolved around Plague Borers rather than just playing your class, and that was not fun for me. Okay, guys. So in summation here, because I do want to summarize my thoughts on the idea of making these dungeons easier. Because he's talking about how the most fun, most desirable, and easiest dungeon is without a doubt Necrotic Wake. Again, it's not without a doubt because I'll tell you right now, Necrotic Wake is absolutely not my favorite dungeon. Getting a Necrotic Wake key at the start of the week feels great. Only if you're doing weekly 15s. Otherwise, it's like getting whichever key you need to push that week based on score is in my opinion, what feels the most great. Getting a Theater of Pain or Sanguine Depth feels bad. Ideally, all dungeons are as fun, cool as this Necrotic Wake, which is difficult to accomplish, but that doesn't mean we can't try. So that is why these ideas are being brought up, because they feel like Necrotic Wake is the best dungeon in Shadowlands, and all the other ones need to be given the Necrotic Wake treatment, basically. And I don't agree. I don't agree with that. In my opinion, Necrotic Wake needs to be made more difficult. And it's not that Necrotic Wake should be that the weapons should be overly nerfed or that the orbs should be made to be less good or anything like that. The reason that Necrotic Wake is being abused right now is because people are exploiting the crafters in order to have them endlessly cleave the last two bosses, and that is what needs to go away, right? There's really nothing that you're going to be able to do about them cleaving the third boss in there because you've got a crafter actually in the room that you can CC. So I will accept that. I mean, if you're really good at the game and you want to exploit that type of thing, that's totally fine and well within the metrics of the dungeon. But snapping that crafter up to the top with the last boss and basically nerfing the last boss's HP by 30% is in my opinion not what makes Mythic Plus good. And certainly, you know, they got rid of it after BFA because of all the shenanigans that was taking place with snapping. And you know, I think that if you take that portal up to the last boss, the ad should just reset. I don't like that whole snapping upstairs type thing, which is how people are getting past the pain point of the last boss in Necrotic Wake. Um, but you know, there are some good changes proposed in here, things that I would like to see. That would make them a little bit more enjoyable. Mists of Tina Scythe is a big pain point for me on Tyrannical. I just never want to step foot in there, just because of how long the first and second boss drag on. But you know, the idea of making these dungeons much easier, like if you were to implement all of these changes at face value, all of these dungeons would be cakewalks, and all it would do is just make those dungeons easier to push on higher keys. Right? It would just move the goalposts. Um, I do believe that all of them should be relatively even, and you know, within that point, I would say the better idea is to actually make Necrotic Wake more difficult, not make 7 other dungeons easier. So that's my take on it, guys. Like if you agree, share your comments. If you disagree, feel free to throw it down in the comments, and we'll have some banter back and forth and suss it out. I always appreciate the feedback, regardless of what you have to say. Subscribe and subscribe to the channel. I appreciate all the support I've gotten so far as we get this fledgling channel off the ground. And I will see you in the next one.